Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to a Wednesday rant. Definitely an interesting week coming into the last weeks here of August. We're getting a bit of a fall weather here in Vancouver, which isn't so exciting. But what is exciting, precious metals. And this, we're going to cover the theme of it being the CEO of Wheaton Precious Metals, Randy Smallwood, was on Kitco, reiterating his love of silver. Even though he was the, I guess, the president of the World Gold Council. So, of course, very much in favor of gold as well. But he was on Kitco talking about why silver in particular. And that's a great video to go check out. We'll have a bit more on that in a moment. But before I even go on about why the likes of Randy Smallwood love silver more than anything else, is remind people that Warren Buffett also isn't a fan of gold, big fan of silver. Now, that doesn't mean that someone has to base their entire outlook on, say, a Warren Buffett because of his incredible value fundamentals, value-based investing, and just take it for his word that's I like silver, I don't like gold. We certainly find both very attractive, but what's interesting is that silver has a very significant industrial and commercial output. Certainly a huge factor in solar panels is conductive metal. Copper is certainly most notable for it, but silver is as well. And that plays a big part in the phasing in the factor of that is that it isn't just a precious metal that's like gold that central banks are buying. Silver has a big practical implication. Now, whenever we talk about silver, and let me preface this by saying we're actually going to start, and I'm not a good trader, but we're going to start showing on these as well some of the trades we're putting on the commodity side of things. We talk about equities. That's what we like. We're long-term holders. But in order to talk more about specific commodities specifically, we're going to have our interactive brokerage up, and we'll highlight some of the base metals that we love, and of course the precious metals. And you can come along and trade with us. It'll be fun because I'm not a trader. I've tried trading in the past. Of course, I've worked at Merrill Lynch and have quite an extensive background. But we want to highlight the difference between someone who's an investor, who would be someone like myself, and even though I like high risk investment, compared to someone who wants high risk trading. And it'll be fun because we'll get to talk about all these metals. We'll get to talk about the energy transition, and we'll get to have a bit of fun at my expense perhaps as well. And that will also encourage those who are focused mainly on the commodities and not necessarily the equity portion of it at all to get involved in the conversation. And whenever I do talk about specific commodities in general, I like to point out, like, friends and people I know that this is their focus. And I always like to start off with Peter Kraut, who's here in Vancouver, and his website is Silver Stock Investor. We've done an interview with him just 2 months ago. Outstanding guy. He's got a book as well. You can look into. Go to his website. He points out right on the front page of his website, it's in a massive bull market offering generational opportunity, and silver gained 3,700% in its last secular bull market. So we like to rely on experts like this that focus on one commodity. I like to focus on tons of different commodities. Maybe I've got ADHD and I need to look at a bunch of different ones. But we like to rely on some of these people that I've got access to, that I get to talk to, and to encourage you to go take a look at as well. They do a lot of the heavy lifting. They'll do the research, they'll put the numbers together, and they like to let people know what that is. And we like to share those people that are dedicating their time and efforts as well. So someone like Peter Kraut here in Vancouver, and of course our good friend Chris Marcus down in the States at Arcadia Economics, is constantly covering silver, and he has a trading background, so he'll find it fun whenever he sees some of the trades that I may be putting on or not putting on. But that is his background, and he will look at equities, but Peter, I think, a bit more. Whereas Chris over at Arcadia Economics, he focuses more on the trading aspect of things. So we're going to ride that fine line between the two. And of course, I encourage you to look at Arcadia Economics as well on YouTube. And in that, we see that he just did his latest kind of video. He mentions, and this is not a small thing, that India's silver is set to double its 2023 levels. That's the highlight of that last video. I would encourage you to go take a look. This is what's great about having access to people that are specific in one commodity, is that they will look at world news and they'll get it out to us. And we appreciate people who put their hard work in like that. And I like to give out, a shout out to those people. So let's kind of talk a little bit more now about, this interview with Kitco. Of course, Kitco is an incredible resource for looking at anything commodities based. And Randy Smallwood is, of course, not a small name in this space with Wheaton Precious Metals, doing an outstanding job. And he starts off talking about a lot of the same things that we hear about. One of the key things being the jobs revision number that's kind of been given a little bit of a highlight, but now certainly the NVIDIA story today is far, far exceeded that. Waiting to see what their earnings report is today later on. And what the reaction the market's going to be. That's the big news story, but it should be a big story that 830,000 jobs revision over the course of a year. That's not a small issue. That's not a small accounting area. That's not even a statistical anomaly. That's way outside any parameters that should be acceptable. That people should even just go, oh, well, that happens. No, that shouldn't happen. If your data is that skewed and that far off, then your data is not meaningful. It just simply isn't. How can you possibly model anything whenever your data is that far off? It just makes it impossible. And that, once again, you can choose to look at that in different ways. I look at it as being the big stories the last couple of years, 3-4 years, has been rampant inflation, and then it's supposedly transitory, which it hasn't been. The Fed trying to tackle this inflation, which it's claiming it has. It's slowed the pace, but reminding people that doesn't mean that because the pace is slowing now and it's not up at 10, 12, 15%. I know that they weren't reporting it that high, but I think you can look at shadow stats and you can see how high it truly has been for the average person. That it's just the rate of growth. We had a huge spike and everything cost more, and now it's just not, propelling forward at the same rate. But it's still fairly aggressive, and the Fed wants to tackle that. But the narrative was, well, we've got lots of jobs, so the economy is doing great because we got all these jobs. We've kind of talked about it over time. Is a lot of these jobs have been, government jobs, certainly in the U.S. I mean, Canada. That's what drives the economy. It's very much it is a leftist country, and it is the public sector that creates a lot of jobs, and funding from the taxes go to pay that. That has made Canada also less desirable of late. But there is a very big upside to this, is that there's logically and realistically a change of regime going to be happening. And that will hopefully be more pro-business, pro-investment. And certainly if we look at some provinces, they're much more open to that. One that, once again, it's controversial, on your take on politics, whatnot. But if we look specifically for energy transition and we look for mining, Quebec is exceptional. They have really been on board and see the importance of minerals and what that means. One could even argue that they're looking to try to grab hold of the energy foundation away from the likes of Alberta. I would say it's not likely to happen, but it's great to see. We want that kind of competition, but Alberta is not on its own as well. I mean, they have been pushing DLE, a lot of lithium stories, and of course, they are the bedrock of energy and will be for some time. Lots of hydrogen stories coming out from Alberta as well. We had mentioned earlier on another podcast, I think $2 billion from Lind, which is a UK gas company, going into Alberta for a hydrogen project. So we see that there's lots of things happening, and we'd love to get your feedback as to what that, how do you think that changes the face of the Canadian economy moving forward? And if the transition from power, if that will affect it in any way, shape, or form as well. So Randy also talked quite a bit about BRICS. Now, if you mention BRICS to CNBC, it's kind of an afterthought. A lot of people wouldn't even think it's that serious an issue, and it may not be. So if you're in our space, and likely if you're following me, you know what BRICS is. If you're in the mining space, then you certainly know what it is, and it's been a big highlight. I don't think it's proper to completely ignore it. And perhaps, though, if you're the likes of CNBC, you think it's so far-fetched, the idea that these countries would come off of the U.S. system. I would say over the course of especially the last year, there's been enough indicators to show that it's not only possible, but looking a little bit more likely that is what's happening, or at least the foundations of it happening. But once again, and it being a logical caveat to that, we only have so much of the information. And on top of that, those BRICS countries, they're allies, but how strong allies are they? We even just saw a report coming out of India saying that they would like some sort of agreement, maybe not formal, but they're not that excited to exchange currency with yuan. China and India have a very complex, let's just say, relationship. It would be possibly a friendship of necessity to some degree. But that also, I would argue, if you are someone in the West, so if you are in the US or Canada, I would say courting India and getting them on board and helping that economy grow might be a positive thing. Let me know what your thoughts are. If you think that India could have the same growth that China had, even though China is slowing down a little bit here. And that's a complex question because it's a different government, it's a different country altogether, different culture, different rules. But it does have a huge growing middle class. So does it have more of an opportunity? I'd love to hear that feedback from you as well. These are all things that Randy Smallwood talked about in his Kitco interview. And it was that fact that silver has that industrial component. And whether that also means, we've talked about it before, the solar panels, and we hear that from all of the people who are strong proponents of silver, is that's a big factor. On top of that big factor, though, is that we have in Mexico, going before Congress, I think for the second time, a ban on open pit mining. Now, that is a significant issue. I'm assuming that even if that went through Congress, companies already mining right now would be grandfathered in, so they wouldn't have to worry about it. But any new mining company, there would be a ban on open pit. That's a significant problem since a large amount of silver comes from Mexico. And this is interesting because we've brought up the question before, is that for leftist countries that are apparently the biggest and strongest proponents of ESG and DEI and all these kind of the narrative that's all pushed together, why is it that they're making it so difficult to be able to mine, to get the minerals and metals that are required to do this transition? If you have an environmental situation that is an absolute catastrophe, that is life-threatening, that is going to change the face of the planet, well, here's two things. Why aren't we doing everything we can to get those metals out of the ground in a right and correct and safe manner? Why is it taking so long to permit? Why is it taking so long to get money into that space? If that was the case, most of them do know, the politicians, that mining plays a key role. Some might just dismiss it being, oh, we'll find it, we'll get them later. That's a very strange belief. Pretty much every mining analyst will say that there's a supply and demand issue that is going to be even further enhanced by the tensions that we're having, not only Ukraine and Russia, with China and US, China and Taiwan, all throughout the Middle East. These things aren't going away anytime soon. And trying to do this transition on top of that, sending your materials from South America or Canada or the US over to China to go process, to go make something, to send it back, that's an insane model if you're an environmentalist. So I would also, as a larger macro idea, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is the idea of wrapping and bundling ESG as a ideological package, which people have eaten up gladly, I would say that that's also a bit of an oxymoron, because if the environment, is of utter importance, then having social and governance issues should be very minute, almost minimal. I liken it to the idea of that movie Armageddon. If there's an asteroid hurtling towards a planet and life's going to be altered by 2030 or 2050, do you think anyone really cares about social license? It doesn't matter. So there's a mix-up of narrative between what's real and then what's actually being done. And I always liken it to, whether it's one-on-one conversations with people, is that people can say all they want. It's the actions that mean something. So when they're on CNBC or promoting this or that, or telling you they promised to do the following, what are they actually doing? And that is relevant, and comes full circle to precious metals, because we hear or don't hear enough about governments, federal bodies purchasing gold. It's happening at a huge rate. The BRICS countries, most notable. That should be major news, but it's not. And part of it too is that it's a tough sell. Let's be honest. People don't. It's not glamorous. It simply isn't. We think, though, just because there's a more glamorous and exciting story to be told, which of course is AI and technology, and believe me, that's a fight all of its own. And I would say right up here, one of the most important, and I'll get to that. But we can't also dismiss the boring foundational stuff. That is critical, and especially right now when we're on very shaky ground, particularly in the West. One could argue the whole world is a bit on shaky ground right now. But trillions and trillions of dollars have been printed. They've been injected into certain sectors, into certain things. One can easily debate over whether they agree or don't agree. I would say that everybody with common sense would say, yes, infrastructure needs to be done. Once again, people will argue, is it actually going to infrastructure or is it not? We see a big, strange event in the States with, I believe it's $7.6 billion going towards electric vehicle charging stations. And I think 6 were built. This can't be done. And this isn't just picking on government. Government does that. Big, huge corporations do that all the time as well. I mean, money gets spent and it gets, it just disappears. But those are shocking numbers. And when you look at the reality of what it's going to take to do an energy transition, $7.6 billion poured into the mining sector would be astronomical. It would mean that we could get a clear path to independence, to these critical metals, to create the solar panels, to help fuel nuclear reactors, to help make the wind turbines, all the things that people want, apparently, and desperately need, but there doesn't seem to be a clear path towards. And I saw a great quote, which will annoy some people, and other people will champion. Most of the people watching here will champion, but it's Thomas Sowell. And he says, it's hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong. Now, of course, people immediately go to, oh, well, that's big government. Well, yeah, that's true. But that's also been a corporate issue as well. We've seen far too many fund managers, hedge fund managers who get compensated by taking risk with your money. It's not their money. You could have a hedge fund with a couple of $1 billion in it, and if you're with that hedge fund, you get 25% of gains. So you're motivated financially to risk as much as you can to get a return. And there's no price other than maybe you'll be fired. But that's not the upside is huge. The downside, not so much. Of course, politicians fall in that range because they seemingly can do whatever they want and never burdened by those decisions. We see a little bit more of an openness, and I would say this is a good thing when we saw failures at Vale in Brazil with that tailings dam, causing death. We saw that there was a couple of people that were held criminally responsible. Now that is what's needed. If you're making a decision on something that's of life and death, you should be that whole chain of command. Yes, you're responsible. If you're trying to save money and it causes death, and whether that's Boeing or that's anything, yes, that's why you're paid the big bucks. You should be held responsible. I know we're ranting about a whole bunch of things. We're trying to turn it back into silver and whatnot, but silver has a chance right now of really growing. And we see gold is being, it's usually the go-to at first, but that the exponential, I won't say exponential, but there's a more aggressive gain to be had in silver. So certainly we're going to be paying more attention to it. Certainly whenever we start pulling up the charts and we put on small little trades, that's likely going to be one of the first ones we do because it's going to be exciting and we're going to test some theories. And with that, we're all going to learn a little bit if you choose to join in. I think it'll be fun, and I think it'll be interesting to give us a platform to keep on talking about the difference between precious metals and base metals, because sooner or later, the world's going to have to come to terms with this, and it's going to have to understand that we need to do this. And the better that we can educate people now and get them excited about it, and to show, especially in Canada, that we have an opportunity to be the leaders or right up there with the leaders on all of these fronts for critical metals. And that should be something we were proud of. It shouldn't be something that we should bemoan or belittle. It should be something where we can show the world that we do properly with social governments, with all key stakeholders doing very well and happy to do it, and to do the best we can to marry all of those things together. The other two things I want to just touch on very briefly because it matters as to why precious metals are doing so well. One we mentioned was this AI and chips race. We see so much money going towards that. And one could argue that, yes, there's a lot of myth and there's a lot of science fiction and there's a lot of maybe AI will do this, but there's also a lot of great things that it is doing. And if we take away the large language models, which are fun, and they're great tools that can help you crunch numbers and analyze numbers, those will become exceptionally useful and beneficial to some degree. We're going to do a whole talk on AI later on and how it sources its data and how that loop actually ends up eating itself unbeknownst to itself, and how a new way of looking at AI is required. And there are companies doing it. The arms race for AI and generative AI is arguably the most important, even above energy and even above owning the printing press and being able to print money at your own life. Because if it's able to do the things that some are claiming, and whoever wins that race first, they will have control. So I understand why that is the most prescient and pressing of issues, but it shouldn't be too far down that energy is next. And whether or not you agree with the transition or not, we kind of like to take a step back and remove as much politics as possible and say, listen, if we could do things cleaner and greener, why not? I mean, should there be a whole host of options? Should there be a hydrogen fuel cell plus a hybrid plus an EV? Yeah, we should have all those choices. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think if we pose that question to people and say, we want to give you the option of all these things, this one here is a bit cleaner for air quality. Well, okay, great. And it's not that much more expensive. Most people would probably do it. It's just the way it's being marketed is probably not the best. The other thing we'll leave with, and this is interesting, because it does matter in markets too, because we talk about this jobs report and misinformation and what they call malinformation now. We see Telegram, that CEO and founder, arrested in France. Now, of course, lots of propaganda on both sides as to why this is happening. I don't really care to get into it. It's an interesting conversation. I will say that, yes, the likes of Telegram, Discord, Facebook, Instagram, all of these YouTube platforms are known to be propagators of the most nefarious of things. I don't even want to mention the words on here, but you can find terrible things on these platforms. The argument with Telegram is that they didn't have moderators, and that it was like that. And that being said, was almost encouraging terrorism, transfer of funds. There's child predation. There's a lot of issues that I would say that yes, that does happen on this platform. We've seen it on different YouTube channels that they cover, but this also happens on all the other ones as well. And for years, people have called out some of the big tech companies saying, why do you ban and censor a conservative's opinion or a certain keyword about a lockdown or certain things? You'll monitor that and shadow ban it or completely censor it or depopulate that group or just totally shut the person down. Why? But you could have the most offensive, terrible harm to children on, and that can stay up. A lot of people don't know that has happened. You can go look online. There's tons of research on it. It's if you have such an interest. It matters, though, because we see that Mark Zuckerberg has come out, even though he staunchly denied for years that they weren't doing this, they weren't censoring, even despite the Twitter files that came out that showed the collusion that was happening. People still will be amazed that this was happening. He's come out, written a letter the day after the guy from Telegram was picked up. So that's what's interesting. And now once again, why it's interesting from a social standpoint and a political standpoint, that's not as interesting. But what it is interesting is that information and that stifling of information, that stopping a flow of information is important, because once again, if you're not getting the right data from your own government in regards to jobs, how can any investment bank make a model for the year moving forward, a macro model? If you're not getting the right information on a social app that you're allowed to share, and believe me, there's lots of toxic people on all these platforms. We're not talking about totally whacked out crazy. That people are generally pretty smart enough to realize that there's nonsense going on there. We're talking to the vast majority that have some critical thinking ability. It matters then if you can't disseminate information. And if the only platforms or the biggest platforms say, we don't like that message. And that has been happening. It's been now admitted. And that has an effect, not only on each society and each culture and each country, that people start questioning, well, if you're willing to do that and you're willing to have an error on the job side and then an error on this other government report, what's the point in me even trying to follow any of this data? Like, what's true, what's not? And that becomes very disconcerting. And that is at the heart of the issue, is that there needs to be a real coming to terms with clarification and with an honesty about what is going on. And listen, you don't have to like someone's opinion on anything. That's fine. Most people don't really know what they're talking about. And just because someone's an expert doesn't mean that they are. I would certainly never say I'm an expert on XYZ. I openly tell people that I'm an advocate for mining. I love the idea of a transition, but I also have no problem knowing and understanding that oil and gas will play a major role in that. So I like to play that middle of the road. And I believe that middle road is based in reality. But that's my perspective. The unfortunate thing is when people keep on championing that they are free speech advocates, they're for democracy, but at the same time they're censoring and they won't let certain messages out. That is not a mixed message. That's a very obvious and clear message. And once again, that comes back to, it doesn't matter what someone says. It often matters what they do. And we're finding that what they do often is not good. So there's my rant. Lots of opinions for you to have rebuttals to or totally disagree with. But I think people will agree it's a very challenging time. There's lots of questions. And perhaps that alone is why we see such a rise in precious metals and people really coming to the forefront. And I don't see that clearing up anytime soon. It would take monstrous feats and efforts in a more longer term for that to ever clear up. Let me know your thoughts, and I look forward to chatting with you on Friday.